Welcome to Everyday English Excellence. Today, we're going to practice a past modal, would have. These questions and answers are designed to help practice using the past modal, would have, in various contexts, including hypothetical situations, past events, relationships, career, education, and personal growth. Each question prompts a response that naturally uses would have to help reinforce its correct usage in conversation. So, let's get started.
What would you have done differently in your last job? What would you have done differently in your last job?
I would have been more proactive about asking for help. I would have been more proactive about asking for help.
If you could go back to high school, what would you have done? If you could go back to high school, what would you have done?
I would have joined more clubs and activities. I would have joined more clubs and activities.
If you had a second chance, what would you have changed? If you had a second chance, what would you have changed?
I would have spent more time with my family. I would have spent more time with my family.
If you had more time, what would you have done? If you had more time, what would you have done?
I would have taken up a new hobby. I would have taken up a new hobby.
If you could visit any country, where would you have gone? If you could visit any country, where would you have gone?
I would have visited Japan. I would have visited Japan.
If you had unlimited money, what would you have bought? If you had unlimited money, what would you have bought?
I would have bought a house by the beach. I would have bought a house by the beach.
What would you have chosen if you had more options? What would you have chosen if you had more options?
I would have chosen a different major in college. I would have chosen a different major in college.
If you knew what you know now, what would you have done? If you knew what you know now, what would you have done?
I would have saved more money for retirement. I would have saved more money for retirement.
If you had listened to your parents, what would have happened? If you had listened to your parents, what would have happened?
I would have avoided a lot of trouble. I would have avoided a lot of trouble.
What would you have done if you were there? What would you have done if you were there?
I would have helped them with the project. I would have helped them with the project.
If you had seen the accident, what would you have done? If you had seen the accident, what would you have done?
I would have called for emergency services. I would have called for emergency services.
What would you have said if you disagreed? What would you have said if you disagreed?
I would have shared my opinion politely. I would have shared my opinion politely.
If you could travel in time, where would you have gone? If you could travel in time, where would you have gone?
I would have visited ancient Rome. I would have visited ancient Rome.
What would you have brought on a long trip? What would you have brought on a long trip?
I would have brought a good book and some snacks. I would have brought a good book and some snacks.
If you had gone on vacation last year, where would you have gone? If you had gone on vacation last year, where would you have gone?
I would have gone to Hawaii. I would have gone to Hawaii.
If you could change history, what would you have done? If you could change history, what would you have done?
I would have stopped the war. I would have stopped the war.
If you were president, what would you have changed? If you were president, what would you have changed?
I would have focused on education and healthcare. I would have focused on education and healthcare.
What would you have done during a historical event? What would you have done during a historical event?
I would have tried to help people in need. I would have tried to help people in need.
If you had married earlier, how would your life be different? If you had married earlier, how would your life be different?
I would have had kids at a younger age. I would have had kids at a younger age.
What would you have done if you hadn't met your partner? What would you have done if you hadn't met your partner?
I would have moved to another city. I would have moved to another city.
If you could meet a family member who passed away, who would it be? If you could meet a family member who passed away, who would it be?
I would have loved to meet my great-grandfather. I would have loved to meet my great-grandfather.
If you had a different career path, what would you have chosen? If you had a different career path, what would you have chosen?
I would have become a teacher. I would have become a teacher.
What would you have done if you hadn't gotten this job? What would you have done if you hadn't gotten this job?
I would have continued looking for work. I would have continued looking for work.
If you could start your career over, what would you have done? If you could start your career over, what would you have done?
I would have started my own business. I would have started my own business.
If you could invent something, what would it be? If you could invent something, what would it be?
I would have invented a flying car. I would have invented a flying car.
If you had invested in technology earlier, what would you have gained? If you had invested in technology earlier, what would you have gained?
I would have made a lot of money. I would have made a lot of money.
What would you have done with a technology that doesn't exist yet? What would you have done with a technology that doesn't exist yet?
I would have used it to make life easier. I would have used it to make life easier.
If you had studied more, what would have happened? If you had studied more, what would have happened?
I would have gotten better grades. I would have gotten better grades.
If you had gone to a different university, what would you have studied? If you had gone to a different university, what would you have studied?
I would have studied engineering. I would have studied engineering.
What would you have done if you didn't have to study? What would you have done if you didn't have to study?
I would have traveled around the world. I would have traveled around the world.
If you could change something about yourself, what would it be? If you could change something about yourself, what would it be?
I would have become more confident. I would have become more confident.
If you had more time, what would you have learned? If you had more time, what would you have learned?
I would have learned a new language. I would have learned a new language.
What would you have done to improve your health? What would you have done to improve your health?
I would have started exercising earlier. I would have started exercising earlier.
If you had worked harder, what would you have achieved? If you had worked harder, what would you have achieved?
I would have been promoted to a higher position. I would have been promoted to a higher position.
What would you have done if you had more resources? What would you have done if you had more resources?
I would have started my own charity. I would have started my own charity.
If you could change your career, what would it be? If you could change your career, what would it be?
I would have become a musician. I would have become a musician.
If you had more creative freedom, what would you have created? If you had more creative freedom, what would you have created?
I would have written a book. I would have written a book.
What would you have done if you had artistic talent? What would you have done if you had artistic talent?
I would have painted beautiful landscapes. I would have painted beautiful landscapes.
If you could create any work of art, what would it be? If you could create any work of art, what would it be?
I would have created a large sculpture. I would have created a large sculpture.
If you could play any sport, which one would it be? If you could play any sport, which one would it be?
I would have played tennis. I would have played tennis.
What would you have done if you had more athletic ability? What would you have done if you had more athletic ability?
I would have become a professional athlete. I would have become a professional athlete.
If you had joined a sports team, which one would it be? If you had joined a sports team, which one would it be?
I would have joined a soccer team. I would have joined a soccer team.
What would you have done if you had better communication skills? What would you have done if you had better communication skills?
I would have spoken at more conferences. I would have spoken at more conferences.
If you could improve one social skill, what would it be? If you could improve one social skill, what would it be?
I would have improved my public speaking. I would have improved my public speaking.
If you had better negotiation skills, what would you have achieved? If you had better negotiation skills, what would you have achieved?
I would have gotten a better salary. I would have gotten a better salary.
If you could protect one part of nature, what would it be? If you could protect one part of nature, what would it be?
I would have protected the rainforests. I would have protected the rainforests.
What would you have done to help the environment? What would you have done to help the environment?
I would have reduced plastic use. I would have reduced plastic use.
If you could live in any environment, which one would you choose? If you could live in any environment, which one would you choose?
I would have chosen a cabin in the woods. I would have chosen a cabin in the woods.
If you could change one thing about your health, what would it be? If you could change one thing about your health, what would it be?
I would have improved my diet. I would have improved my diet.
What would you have done to improve your fitness? What would you have done to improve your fitness?
I would have started running regularly. I would have started running regularly.
If you could change one habit, what would it be? If you could change one habit, what would it be?
I would have stopped eating junk food. I would have stopped eating junk food.
And that's it for today's video. I hope these simple conversations help you improve your English. Remember, practice makes perfect. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video. Bye!